This New Orleans Saints offseason so far has literally been both the worst and most entertaining roller coaster I've ever been on. We got all that and a little bit of lagniappe for you on today's episode of Locked On Saints.
You are Locked On Saints, your daily New Orleans Saints podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is good, Who Dat Nation and Who Dat family? Welcome into another episode of Locked On Saints, your daily podcast covering your favorite team, the New Orleans Saints. Part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thanks so much as always, making Locked On Saints your first listen of the day every day. Don't forget we're free and available on all podcast apps and on YouTube as well. I'm your host, Ross Jackson, at Ross Jackson Nola on Twitter, your New Orleans Saints expert, credential member of the media, CrescentCitySports.com, USA Today's Saints Wire, Tuesdays on Locked On NFL, and here with you every single Monday through Friday on Locked On Saints. Today's episode of Locked On Saints brought to you by our friends over at LinkedIn. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the candidates you want to talk to faster. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL. On today's episode of Locked On Saints, New Orleans Saints could potentially be in the market for a defensive coordinator, depending upon how things go for Kris and Ryan Nielsen. Could they find one of those replacements from within the division? Then, or before that, we'll get to Allen Lazard, who is the perfect free agent wide receiver target for the New Orleans Saints this offseason. I'll tell you why. But before we begin with all of that, this New Orleans Saints offseason so far has already been a roller coaster. I call it simultaneously the best and worst roller coaster I've ever been on because it's the best in that it's entertaining and fun to watch, but it's the worst in that it feels like it's never ending. And as you know, one of the best parts about a roller coaster is getting off of that roller coaster at the end and be able to talk about how much fun you had. Right now, we're still in this thing because the Sean Payton sweepstakes has more ups and downs, but without stopping, like a roller coaster, than anything that we've experienced so far, or really we're set to experience going into this off season. Remember, this was supposed to be pretty simple, right? The team spoke with the New Orleans Saints, get permission. Everybody's on the same page in terms of what the compensation request is, or what the neighborhood of the compensation request is, because it's a little bit different by each team and all. And then once Sean Payton sort of took the time to meet with all these teams, we thought we would see things progress a little bit more quickly. Sean Payton would be the first head coach hired in the cycle, and then all of the other coaches would land where they were going to go. This is something we see all the time in free agency and stuff like that. The big fish usually always lands first, and then everybody else makes their decisions. Well, that's just not what's happened, or been what's happened so far in this whole Sean Payton sweepstakes and this whole NFL offseason coaching cycle. We actually saw the first head coach land here in the NFC South division, just across the way from the New Orleans Saints. The Carolina Panthers hired Frank Reich. Frank Reich was the first head coach hired in this cycle. That was not the expectation. DeMeco Ryans looks like he's down the road with the Denver Broncos. So where is Sean Payton in all of this? The only one that maybe could have landed their head coach first, and it would have made sense, would have been the Indianapolis Colts, who never really received permission, or however that all worked, right? Either they didn't, we believe they requested permission, but they didn't get permission. So either Sean didn't want to go there, the Saints didn't want him going there, or the compensation wasn't there, right? Could be any number of things that led to that not happening. So where is Sean Payton now? Well, Sean Payton presently on Thursday had his big old meeting with the Arizona Cardinals. There were some reports that it was several hours long, and then they left the facility. He and Michael Bidwell, the Arizona Cardinals owner, and went off somewhere else. The Denver Broncos, there were some rumors popping up about how Sean Payton had some concerns about Broncos ownership, to which Sean Payton stepped in and said, this is 100% false, had a fantastic meeting with Broncos ownership and their leadership. So even Sean now is jumping into this conversation and being a little bit more public about kind of how he feels things are going, at least from the Denver Broncos front. But what we haven't seen that we expected was a second interview with the Denver Broncos. Now, that could have been because Sean Payton scheduled an interview with the Arizona Cardinals, and the Broncos said, "Oh, well, go do that. We'll get our other interviews in, and then we'll circle back if whatever." And that could be that could just be professional respect, right? So we don't fully know yet. We just know that this process hasn't gone the way that we expected. That teams aren't clamoring as much as maybe we thought that they would be for Sean Payton, and that teams aren't as in much of a hurry as we expected to land Sean Payton. Everybody's kind of willing to take their time here, which is probably great for Sean, right? He's not having to be all stressed out about all this. He's able to kind of go and feel out, see how things go and all that. But it's a little bit stressful for New Orleans Saints fans who want to see all of this come to an end. And I'm sure the New Orleans Saints as well, who want to know, okay, are we getting these extra picks? Are we not getting these extra picks? How does all this happen? So where are things sitting as of right now? As I mentioned, Sean Payton met with the Arizona Cardinals on Thursday. Simultaneously, Dan Quinn, who was considered one of the top candidates for the Arizona Cardinals, informed the Dallas Cowboys that he was going to be returning to Dallas as their defensive coordinator. Now, that's just a little bit, it's either a highly coincidental or a little bit, it's a little suspicious, not suspicious, but it's a little indicative of something, right? Like there is something there to kind of read in between the lines on, maybe read a little bit too much, but still read in between the lines on. So now is all of a sudden, over the course of these last 3 days, has Sean Payton gone from not really knowing what the interest is from Arizona to being the Denver Broncos favorite, to being out in Denver, to maybe still being in Denver, to now being the Arizona Cardinals top candidate all of a sudden? There's a whole lot of ups and downs in all of this. So could he be going to Arizona? Because right now, the Arizona Cardinals, who are the other coaches that are kind of involved in this conversation, right? So if Sean Payton were to pick Arizona, it would be an interesting one for the New Orleans Saints. What do they get in return? Do they get that high second round pick and a future first? Do the Saints add some fodder to the Sean Payton trade to try to get that number 3 overall pick up out of Arizona? Do the Saints load up on future draft? Do they load up on future draft considerations as opposed to draft considerations this year since Arizona's picked so high? There's a whole bunch of ways that the Saints could really go with all of this. But in any case, if they trade Sean Payton this offseason, they're in a better situation come the draft than they would be if they didn't trade Sean Payton. So no matter what, this is kind of a net positive for the New Orleans Saints. And so the biggest focus for the Saints becomes getting the best return possible. And that's something that Mickey Loomis spoke about in his end-of-year presser, that's their responsibility is, of course, to get the best return that they can for Sean Payton. The interesting thing is going to be, does the public believe you, right? Does the public believe that a second-round pick and a future first-round pick and some additional draft compensation is the best that you could have gotten? Or is the public going to say, no, they should have been able to get the number 3 overall pick? Which, by the way, the only people talking about the number 3 overall pick are people that are fans of the New Orleans Saints, right? It's the public that's talking about that. No one else is talking about the number 3 overall pick. So I wouldn't consider that to be a part of anything. It's just something that fans want in return for Sean Payton, which makes sense, right? Because a fan of Sean Payton and a fan of the New Orleans Saints is looking at what is it that Sean Payton is worth. All of these other teams around that are potentially trading for Sean Payton are thinking, what's the least that I have to give up to get Payton? Two very, very different points of view, two very, very different perspectives, and two very, very different starting plates in terms of how you see where compensation can come from or see what the compensation can end up being, all of that. So either way, though, it's an absolute roller coaster, and it doesn't look like one way or another, even if Sean Payton gets traded or doesn't get traded, it doesn't look like the roller coaster is over anytime soon. Coming up next, why Allen Lazard is the best free agent target for the New Orleans Saints this offseason when it comes to free agent wide receivers. I'll tell you why as we continue on with today's episode of Locked On Saints. Today's episode of Locked On Saints brought to you by our friends over at LinkedIn. Let's say that you're a small business owner or you're a hiring manager and you know that success in 2023 depends on the team members you surround yourself with. That's why you've got to check out LinkedIn Jobs. You've probably used LinkedIn Jobs before to apply for jobs. Maybe now you're in a hiring position, so you can go right back to LinkedIn Jobs, same way you might have gotten your job, and find the right fit for your company or the company that you're hiring for. And they want to make sure that it is efficient and that it is easy by making sure that they're matching up the open roles with the people that have the skills, values, and experiences that are going to help you achieve your goals. They do this with screening questions, being able to take advantage of the billions of people that utilize LinkedIn all the time. You've got 875 million member profiles that are there, people visiting multiple times a day, people looking for jobs multiple times a day. Tons of hits when you use LinkedIn Jobs, so you can make sure you get connected fast and for free, because that's what LinkedIn Jobs is here to do. They're here to help you find the qualified candidates you want to talk to faster. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedonnfl. That's linkedin.com/lockedonnfl to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. All right, family, continuing on with today's episode of Locked On Saints. Green Bay Packers wide receiver and outgoing free agent Allen Lazard is the New Orleans Saints' best free agent fit when it comes to wide receiver this offseason, and they should go get him. Let's talk about why. Appreciate you as always for making Locked On Saints a part of your day, for being a part of Locked On Saints as well. Very grateful for all of you. Make sure for your second listen today, you go and check out Locked On NFL. Your boy Q and Kris Carter getting you ready for the NFC AFC Championship game weekend. Whole bunch of fun stuff coming up over on the show there. So make sure you go and check them out wherever you get your podcasts and on YouTube as well. Quick little programming note for you, just so you know, next week I'm in Mobile, Alabama for the Senior Bowl. So Monday's episode is going to be a mock draft Monday, as always, but it's going to be a mock draft Monday focused around Senior Bowl prospects. Make sure you're coming back for that so you can learn a little bit more about the folks that are going to be hyped up and all the clips and all that other stuff that's going to be going on over on Twitter over the course of the 3 practice days. Get ahead of all of it. You'll already know ahead of time because you were here with Locked On Saints. All right, so over the course of the offseason, a lot of the conversation goes towards the draft, of course, and a lot of focus goes towards the draft, all that. But free agency, obviously, very important for the NFL as well. And it's not just because you're going out there and looking for a big fish quarterback. Sometimes you're looking for a big fish at another position. For me, that big fish for the New Orleans Saints this offseason that would cap off anything when it comes to free agency is Green Bay Packers wide receiver Allen Lazard. In my opinion, Allen Lazard should be a New Orleans Saint in 2023. And New Orleans, because he is everything that New Orleans is in need of at the position. He was massively undervalued and underutilized in Green Bay, but still put up great numbers. Put up some great numbers against the New Orleans Saints as well, which some of you might remember a little bit less fondly than you'd like to. But he was somebody that, look, 6'5", 227, 230-ish pounds. He's somebody that could have been utilized a lot more in that Green Bay offense, but Green Bay spent all of that time instead complaining about not having the right fits at skill position players, and Aaron Rodgers complaining about this, that, and the other, and all that. But so we spent so much time with this narrative that the Green Bay Packers weren't investing in weapons, that we didn't pay attention to the weapons that they did have. Guys like Amari Rodgers and Aaron Jones and Big Bob Tonkin, of course, and then of course you've got Tanyan, and then of course Allen Lazard. Allen Lazard, this past season, targeted 100 times, came away with 60 receptions for 788 yards and 6 touchdowns. He has a catch percentage in his career of over 65%. That's really, really solid. So that's one of the reasons why I absolutely like him, because one of the big things that you're going to be looking for the New Orleans Saints this offseason is going to be a possession receiver, a safe possession receiver. That's kind of what Michael Thomas was the 3 games that he was able to play. It's what they needed from Jarvis Landry, but of course he missed a ton of time with injuries as well. And so there's 2 routes that they can go here. You can go the route of going and, bringing back Jarvis Landry, but then you have concerns over the injuries, his durability, all those other things at his age. Or you land a guy like Allen Lazard, who's a whopping 27 years old right now. He'll be 27 when the season starts, as he's only 27 and 47 days old at this moment. Yeah, you go out and you get a guy like this. And look, one of the things that Dennis Allen said in his end of year press conference, which I think has gotten a little bit too connected to Michael Thomas, way more connected to Michael Thomas than it needs to be, is that the Saints didn't have a contested catch threat in 2022. That doesn't have anything to do with Michael Thomas, except for the fact that Michael Thomas wasn't on the field, right? Like, one way or another, the Saints didn't have a possession or a contested catch guy on the field in 2022, and they'll be looking for that in 2023. And I know a lot of people who have mentioned, and rightfully so, well, then why move on from Michael Thomas? Well, he didn't really say that they need that for 2023 or indicate that they'll need that because they're going to move on from Michael Thomas. All he said was that in 2022, they didn't have it. So you imagine then that would mean that in 2023, they would want to have it, Michael Thomas or otherwise. And I think, as many folks do, Michael Thomas is out after this season. Like, $60 million guaranteed in 2024 if he plays 4 games for you in 2023. Like, that's just unrealistic. That's unrealistic for what would be a 31, nearly 32-year-old wide receiver. That doesn't make any sense. And so it's pretty clear that the Saints and Michael Thomas, at least in my view, right, my expectation and anticipation, unless I'll be pleasantly surprised otherwise, is that he'll be on his way out. Otherwise, they'll have to rework that contract to get a whole lot of work done in order to make that a little bit more fathomable and palatable for 2024. So one way or another, you're going to be in need of a possession receiver in 2023, right? Even if you do stick it out with Michael Thomas and whatever, and you adjust the contract so you can still go out there and spend money, then still go out there, in my opinion, and spend money on Allen Lazard. if you have to. Like, you still go and find another one of those possession receivers just in case, because you don't know how much Michael Thomas is going to be able to hold up at this point. So why go get Allen Lazard? Why is he a perfect fit? Okay, he's not the greatest contested catch guy in particular in the NFL, but 48% in the NFL is still really solid, and it's better than what the New Orleans Saints have had been able to put on the field over the course of the past few seasons. So he does give you a little bit of a boost there. He's also 6'5", 230 pounds. So that gives you a build in a division that has stronger, more physical defensive backs, stronger, more physical cornerbacks, to be able to go out there and just naturally outcompete those guys, a la what we've seen with Juwan Johnson at the tight end position. Has that 60% catch rate, so that's a really good spot in terms of just simply having a possession guy, because that's kind of what he would be, right? He'd be a big-bodied possession guy that would be a fantastic complement in Kris Olave and Rashid Shaheed. He is exactly what the New Orleans Saints need. And on top of all that, too, he's no slouch as a runner either, right? 4.5 speed-ish, somewhere around there. Not somebody that's going to turn on the jets like a Rashid Shaheed or a Kris Olave, but hey, you've got a Rashid Shaheed and a Kris Olave already, so you have those guys. And somebody that can still win downfield for you as well, a 3-level threat, not somebody that is only, brings value close to the line of scrimmage or in the short and intermediate area despite his size. So for me, I like very much what Allen Lazard could potentially bring to the New Orleans Saints. I think it's exactly what the New Orleans Saints need over the course of this offseason. I had a great question from a listener who also asked whether or not Adam Thielen would be a good option over the course of this offseason. And I will tell you, he is a good option. Here's why, though, I go with Allen Lazard over Adam Thielen. Allen Lazard, 27 years old, 6'5", 230 pounds, a physical guy, big body possession receiver that can help you with contested catches while not being the best, 50-50 ball receiver in the NFL, versus a 32-year-old, more injury-prone possession receiver that works a little bit closer to the short and intermediate areas on a cheaper contract, right? So those are the good things you're getting with each of those guys. I like the good that I'm getting with Allen Lazard more than the good that I'm getting with Adam Thielen. I also like the fact that Allen Lazard's only 27 years old. You're catching him on his second contract in the NFL. SpotRack right now has his sort of expected market value as being somewhere around $12 million per year, $13 million per year. Great. That's easy. 3-4 year deal, backload it, do all that good stuff. You don't have to give the Christian Kirk contract just because Christian Kirk got that contract. The fact of the matter is that the fact that Christian Kirk got that contract might impact and underwhelm or set the table for this year's wide receivers groups to be underwhelmed. That usually is a roller coaster, just like the Sean Payton thing. So just because Christian Kirk got signed for, $20 million a year or whatever it was, right? More $18 million a year doesn't mean that that's going to be the market this year. So Allen Lazard would be somebody that I think would be within the New Orleans Saints price range, gives them exactly what it is that they're looking for, is a great compliment to the guys that they are going to have on the field in Kris Olave and Rashid Shaheed, and a young guy that you can stick around with, that you can keep around while you've potentially got to shuffle quarterbacks here over the next couple of years. A good thing to have for sure. You want to build the car that any passer can drive. That way, whoever the driver is, the car is ready. It's a good route for the New Orleans Saints to go this offseason, and I think the perfect fit for them when it comes to free agent wide receivers. The New Orleans Saints might be making some changes on the coaching staff, whether they want to or not. The issue is that it won't be their choice. Could Kris Rashid and Ryan Nielsen end up with jobs elsewhere? If that happens, how will the New Orleans Saints find a defensive coordinator to work with Dennis Allen? Well, they could find somebody from right within the division. We got that coming up for you as we continue on and wrap up today's episode of Locked On Saints. Today's episode of Locked On Saints presented by our friends over at Prize Picks. The NFL playoffs are here, and we're really excited about our new sports betting partner here on the Locked On Podcast Network because they're the number one sports book in all of America. It's FanDuel. And if you're new to FanDuel, even better, because there are so many different features that you're going to love that make sports betting nice and easy, super fun, all of that. But also, new customers are going to be able to join today with a $150 in free bets offer guaranteed when you place your first bet of $5. Just sign up today at FanDuel.com/locked-on. FanDuel has all of your favorites when it comes to betting, including money line, point spreads, player props, all of that. Plus, you can even combine bets for a chance at an even bigger payout with a same game parlay. And all that, you can go ahead and find that over at FanDuel today. It's all on the app. It's safe, it's secure, super easy to use. And once again, don't miss out. Place your $5 bet today so you can get $150 in free bets, win or lose, at FanDuel.com/locked on. Make every moment more with FanDuel, the official sportsbook partner of the NFL. All right, family, continuing on with today's episode of Locked On Saints. We've been following this story pretty closely as the New Orleans Saints could be in the midst of a pretty unique situation this offseason if both of their co-defensive coordinators, Kris Richard and Ryan Nielsen, get hired away, because they would lose 2 people but have to replace 3 positions, the most important of which, or the highest ranking of which, being defensive coordinator. But they could potentially find a replacement for defensive coordinator and a guy that did not get rehired within the NFC South, and that's Steve Wilks. Steve Wilks has a really good track record across the NFL as a defensive coordinator, and he's somebody that I think the New Orleans Saints should absolutely be in on if they need to replace their DCs, right? And the tricky part here is that you have Ryan Nielsen interviewing with the Atlanta Falcons as well as the Minnesota Vikings here recently. You have Kris Richard, who has interviewed with the Carolina Panthers, and on Thursday, reportedly, the interview with the Miami Dolphins as well. And I think there are things there that should be really appealing to both of those guys. The Minnesota Vikings have a long-running history of very adept focus on their defensive line. Danielle Hunter, Everson Griffin, Dalvin Tomlinson, Yannick Ngakoue, just all the swings that they've taken over the years. I know that's not their defensive line now, but just all the swings that they've taken over the years at that position. That should be something that is appealing to Ryan Nielsen, who is, by trade a defensive line coach and growing into a defensive coordinator. The Miami Dolphins job might be really appealing for a Kris Richard, as too could be the Carolina Panthers jobs. You're talking about J.C. Horn, Jeremy Chin. You've got Dante Jackson. You've got C.J. Henderson. They have a core of young, talented. C.J. Henderson maybe a little bit more questionable than the others, but you've got some young, talented secondary members there in Carolina. You've got Noah Igbenogany. You've got Javon Holland. You've got, of course, Xavier Howard over in Miami. So there's good fits for both of these guys at the position groups where they are most versed. And then that helps them a ton once they come into defensive coordinator spots. So the trick for the Saints here, though, is if Ryan Nielsen gets hired away, you don't just lose a co-defensive coordinator, you also lose a defensive line coach, right? If Kris Richard gets hired away, you don't only lose the co-defensive coordinator, you lose your secondary coach, your defensive backs coach. So if both get hired away, you lose your defensive coordinators, your secondary coach, and your defensive line coach. That's a tough pill to swallow if you're the New Orleans Saints. Now, secondary coach, you probably already have a built-in guy there, Corey Robinson, who's going to be working with the safeties over with the Senior Bowl this year. He's been working a ton. He has a lot of the same views as Kris Richard. There's a lot of symbiosis there. So I think that would be an easy escalation for the New Orleans Saints within the coaching staff. So they would be able to find a person there. Whether or not they would be okay, it's tough to lose Kris Richard. Like, the Saints got lucky going from Aaron Glenn to Kris Richard. Now you're going from Kris Richard to whom, right? So Corey Robinson, probably the best bet there. Defensive line coach, a lot tougher to pinpoint or figure out. You're really hoping you're going to be able to find, a former defensive coordinator that's willing to take a line job, a position coach job, and try to make the best of that. But where do you find your defensive coordinator? Well, one of the reasons why I highlight Steve Wilks is because Steve Wilks wouldn't be sort of impeded by some of the things that other defensive coordinators, young defensive coordinators, might be impeded by, right? Dennis Allen is going to call the defensive plays. And for a defensive coordinator, that might be a sticking point. They might say, well, then I'm not interested in that job because I don't get to call the plays. Steve Wilks has been in positions where he hasn't called the plays over on the defensive side. He's been a position coach. He was most recently a defensive pass game coordinator, all those other things. And so when I look at, and of course has been a secondaries coach, like he's been helpful there too. And so when you get somebody that is as experienced and successful as a Steve Wilks that you can put in as a defensive coordinator, that you can put into that defensive coordinator spot, you look at what he did in Carolina last year with a hurt defense. What can you do with the New Orleans Saints defense going into 2023, which was the one thing that has really worked throughout 2022. And then his background as a secondary coach helps a younger coach like a Corey Robinson who is stepping into that position in my hypothetical here, right? If Kris Richard and Ryan Nielsen get hired away. And then you just have to find the solution, a defensive line coach, which I'm going to be honest with you. Like if I was sitting here telling you I know exactly who the Saints should hire as a defensive line coach, I'd be blowing smoke at you. Like I would just be lying to you. I'm not going to do that to you. That's something where I don't have the expertise. And so that's something that the Saints would have to figure out in that case. So what's the ideal situation for the New Orleans Saints? Probably the ideal situation for them, for the New Orleans Saints, in terms of what they would want is that neither of those guys get hired away. They get to go into 2023 without making any changes. They would be the only team in the NFC South not making a change at either or head coach, offensive coordinator, defensive coordinator. That might be a positive in the New Orleans Saints' eyes based upon the decisions that they've already made this offseason. Worst case scenario is that you lose both of those guys and you have to replace them. The mid-round sort of selection here, if you will, is that one of them gets hired away and then you just promote the other to being the sole defensive coordinator. Before anybody asks, because I know that there have been questions about this before, no, if Kris Richard gets hired as a defensive coordinator, the Saints do not get draft picks with that as a part of the NFL's diversity initiative and all in terms of increasing minority candidates in coaching and GM. Those are for head coaching job promotions, like promotions into head coaching jobs or promotions into general manager jobs, not coordinator jobs. So even though going from co-defensive coordinator to defensive coordinator is a promotion, it's not a promotion into one of the two spots where you do get those two third round selections. So that's where all that is. Okay. So it's an interesting thing though, right? Like the New Orleans Saints looking back at 2022, did you think defensive coordinator was the spot that they were going to be making a change? No, right? So that will be something the New Orleans Saints might have to navigate whether they like it or not. But Steve Wilks, to me, would be a good option for the Saints at defensive coordinator. And we'll highlight others as well. He's not the only option. He might not be the best option. There are others out there. He's just the one that I like the most at this moment. So if you've got other suggestions, let me know however you want to. All right, y'all. Remember, on Monday, Senior Bowl only mock draft Monday. So we'll break down a bunch of Senior Bowl prospects so that you're ready for Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday practices. And then, of course, I'll be at the Senior Bowl all throughout the week. So keeping you up to date with everything I'm learning, everything I'm hearing, everything's being discussed throughout Senior Bowl week. So got that coming up for you here throughout next week. Enjoy your weekends. And thank you very much, as always, making Locked On Saints your first listen of the day and for being a part of the show for your second listen. Go and check out Locked On NFL. And of course, I appreciate you, as always, making me a part of your day, part of your routine, for saying yes to me and the show. As always, if you see me, say hi. And if you need anything else around your New Orleans Saints in between these episodes, make sure you follow me on Twitter at Ross Jackson, NOLA. Hit me up. Let me know how the family's doing. Let me know how you living. Let me know how you momming them. And trust you, that nation. I'll holla at you.